Hello everyone, welcome back to all of you in the Smelly Army. So for today's video, we're going to be having a look at an all-time classic fragrance, Yves Saint Laurent's Kouros, part of my all-time classic series, which don't include an intro or very much editing at all. Let me know if you've enjoyed the all-time classic series, because I would really like to know. Of course, they don't get the big views that some of the other videos we make, the top 10s, get. And of course, many reviewers nowadays shy away from individual reviews, particularly of older classic fragrances. But if you do enjoy this, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, to keep me motivated to keep putting up this kind of content. Okay guys, so Kouros from 1981, a total classic powerhouse fragrance from the 1980s. Before we get into that, as I've done with some of the other videos in this series, I'm going to talk a bit about the fashion house behind the fragrance. So Yves Saint Laurent, the individual himself, Yves Saint Laurent, was born in 1936 in Oran in French Algeria. By the age of 17 years old, he'd moved to Paris and began to establish himself in the world of fashion designing. In fact, he ended up working for the house of Christian Dior, and by 1957, when Christian Dior himself died, Yves Saint Laurent, as a very young man, was left as really the head designer at the house of Dior. Shortly after this, he got conscripted into the French army because he was still a very young man, and he really didn't fare too well there at all. He was discharged on medical grounds and had a very hard time. I guess reading between the lines, it looks like he pretty much had a kind of a breakdown there and received some medical attention. So he got out of the army that way. By 1961, he was back at work in France and had founded his own house, the fashion house of Yves Saint Laurent. Actually, Christian Dior, the house there, let him go. So, but it worked out well in the end, didn't it? Throughout the 1960s, he popularized trends such as the beatnik look, and also designed a female tuxedo, which was rather revolutionary at the time in 1966. So he became very famous in the French and worldwide fashion world, also known as a bit of a jet setter, and famously a little bit fond of some narcotic substances and booze, allegedly. So my kind of guy, totally. No, just kidding. I don't endorse those kind of things, really. Now, fragrances. By 1964, the house of Yves Saint Laurent released their first fragrance. It was a female fragrance called Y. In 1971, we had Rive Gauche, which you can still find on the shelves today in the blue hairspray type can. Of course, there's a male version of that as well, but it's a completely different fragrance, released much later in 2003. The first men's fragrance then from the house came out in 1971, and it was this one here, Pour Homme. So Yves Saint Laurent Pour Homme, a woody aromatic scent, and a really, really great one, actually. A really, really lovely fragrance. It's quite pronounced in its citrus opening, a little bit green, certainly rather woody, and has a bit of the ruggedness, which was to feature rather more prominently in Kouros, which came along 10 years later. I guess at the time, Pour Homme was pretty much Yves Saint Laurent's answer to Eau Sauvage from Dior, and it's been available in a reissue, not in a bottle like this, one of those little cuboid black bottles that you see. I think they might have even stopped doing those now. I've got a kind of older vintage bottle here, and it is a really great fragrance. But we're talking really about Kouros today.
Don't forget, if you'd like to join the Smelly Army private members club over on Patreon, there's a link in the description to do that. It costs just $2 a month, and you get an extra video from me every week, plus you get to watch everything I've already uploaded in there. We're building a really nice community, lots of interaction, and I'd love to see you in there.
So in 1981, this one was released, Kouros, subtitled by the company as The Scent of the Gods. It was apparently inspired by Yves Saint Laurent's visit to Greece, where he saw the Greek sculptures of young men, which are collectively known, or any one of those would be referred to as a Kouros. So I thought there was a Greek god, Kouros, but I don't think it's a specific god, but those statues in general are known, in each one would be a Kouros. I think the plural might be Kouri. Anyway, Kouros, it's kind of these Greek sculptures which inspired it, hence the bottle has that kind of white marble type feel or look about it, which is kind of neat. And the fragrance actually was launched at a very grand event back in 1981 at the Opera Comique, where Rudolf Nureyev danced and over 1,000 people were there. We've got a little bit of pictures there from the press release surrounding the launch of the fragrance. Let's get into the smell of it and how it was created then. Pierre Bourdon was the perfumer, a very illustrious perfumer. Since then, he's actually given us Cool Water from Davidoff in 1988 and many other fragrances. Most people believe he was the man behind Green Irish Tweed for Creed in 1985, and many in the know people have also told me that they know that he was the man behind Aventus by Creed. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. I couldn't possibly comment, but some people believe he did Aventus for Creed many years later. The notes in this fragrance, there's quite a few of them, so sit tight, hold on to your hats, folks. We've got bergamot, aldehyde, artemisia, coriander, clary sage, carnation, patchouli, cinnamon, orris root, jasmine, vetiver, geranium, honey, leather, tonka bean, amber, musk, civet, oak moss and vanilla, and it's one that has had many different iterations, so I'll try and get a little bit of focus there on the bottom of my bottle. So we can see mine is from the Parfums Corp era. I believe this bottle dates to sometime in the 1990s, possibly around the mid-90s. There is a great article on the different eras of the production of this fragrance, different vintages, and it's in the blog Raiders of the Lost Scent, and I'll link that in the description. It's Raiders of the Lost Scent Kouros, you want to search on Google, but I will put a link in the description to that blog which describes the different stages. So when the fragrance has these silver shoulders here on the bottle, that's vintage of one sort or another. Nowadays it's just white at the top and bottom of the bottle. I think the cap still has the silver bits. It's lost a bit of its oomph, most people believe, so the smell is kind of the same, but it's just lost a bit of the magic, maybe a bit of the animalicness. So let's talk about how it actually does smell. So my vintage bottle here has been my scent of the day. It's definitely got a freshness. It's got a reputation as being very funky, very masculine, somewhat animalic, so the note of civet is from the civet cat, a scraping from its nether regions. And of course musks can smell very, very animalic. If you've ever smelled Kiehl's original musk, that's very similar to Kouros. It's that kind of musky note, slightly animalic, funky, maybe a bit subliminally or subconsciously a kind of sexual undertone. Perhaps it even, that would be an idea, but that could be an attractive thing, although the smell itself can be a little bit funky. It's probably worth noting that back in the 1980s, rugged testosterone-laden fragrances like this weren't anything that unusual. Chanel's Antaeus came out in the same year, and in 1980, Dior had brought us Jules, both of which have a very rugged, leathery, perhaps musky undertone to them. Prior to that, we'd had Givenchy Gentleman from 1974, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme from 1973, all much more masculine and rugged smelling than the stuff that we get served up with today. And so really this was part of the zeitgeist of those times. So although some of us nowadays might find this really quite a surprisingly potent fragrance, it wasn't that surprising to smell a fragrance like this in 1981, although it is perhaps arguably the best of its class. But there's a freshness about this fragrance. Don't believe this thing that it's just this total powerhouse, in your face, hairy chest fragrance. There's subtlety, there's complexity in here. We've got bergamot, we've got lots of floral notes, there's aldehydes, there's jasmine. I definitely pick up on a jasmine note and a bit of that indolic, again, slightly funky quality that the white floral note of jasmine can have. This is a very complex, beautiful fragrance. There is a sweetness mixed in here. We've got honey, we've got vanilla. There's all kinds of things going on. It's very hard to describe it. It's certainly potent juice. Mine is a strong performer. I wouldn't say actually that this old bottle is quite beats beast mode. That may be because of its age. So I'm just going to actually give you a quick reading from the book by Luca Turin, where he describes it. The famous perfume writer Luca Turin describes the fragrance thus. Okay, so he gives it 5 stars out of 5, and his little 2-word description that he gives to most fragrances is musky fougere. Here we go. He says, 27 years after its release, the book was written in 2008, the structure of Kouros is still so novel, so immediately recognizable, and so impossible to imitate that it is probably a sporadic case in perfumery. It smells like the tanned skin of a guy with Jomina in his hair, stepping out of the shower wearing a pre-World War I British dandified fragrance. Citrus, flowers, musk. It has that faintly repellent, clean, dirty feel of other people's bathrooms and manages to smell at once scrubbed and promissory of an unmade bed. The fact that all these images are conjured up by a fragrance in itself so consummately abstract is a testimony to the brilliance of its creator, Pierre Bourdon. Such things happen not by accident, but only as the work of genius. So high praise indeed. Very complex, very powerful, not entirely just a rugged powerhouse fragrance. It has subtlety, it has freshness, it has a slightly old school vibe, there's an undertone of leather, there's sweetness, there's all kinds of stuff going on here, but it's a real throwback kind of fragrance. I wouldn't say that many people nowadays are going to find that this is a great compliment getter. If you're looking to meet younger ladies in their 20s or 30s, I think this kind of fragrance probably won't appeal to that many of them, and even people much older than that. Many people's tastes have moved on. However, I find it extremely compelling, extremely fascinating. I'm very lucky to have this one in my collection. I feel very privileged to have an old bottle of it. It's a real interesting and classic fragrance for collectors, and those brave enough to wear it will find that it's not as repellent as some reviews would have you think. You see people say that it smells of urinal cakes and that kind of thing. I don't get that. I get that it's a bit animalic, but there's also a heck of a lot more going on. In terms of development on skin, I think more so than a lot of fragrances, you do get a bit of development. It starts out with a little bit of a bright burst of freshness, and there's a soapy feel definitely in the opening on this one, and then the undertone of sweet and musky scents really takes over more and more as the fragrance develops, and it becomes sort of part of your skin. It melds in with some of the natural smell of masculine skin, I think, to an extent, and sort of, it amplifies some of the rugged and musky elements of not body odor smells or anything like that, but some of the perhaps subconsciously attractive to members of the opposite sex kind of things that maybe men's hormones or pheromones are giving off. I don't know. It's that kind of vibe I get with this fragrance. Really, really interesting stuff. If you can get an older bottle, it's worth hanging in there for anyone with the silver shoulders, and the modern one is close, but not quite packing the punch or the animalic muskiness, maybe not the real oak moss of the original. Guys, let me know if you have Kouros of any iteration, any era, and what you think of it as a fragrance. Is it worthy of the title all-time classic? Is it a 10 out of 10 fragrance? Well, I'm going to say that it is, just for the pure magical artistry of it, but 10 out of 10 in terms of compliment factor or wearability, maybe nowadays not so much. Let me know what you thought about that in the comments down below, guys. Thanks ever so much for watching. Remember, whatever you're doing in life, let's project. Bye-bye. Smelly.